Good evening. Buonasera for me. Good day for most of you. I think most of you know me. I'm Ann Robichaux, and I'm a guide here in Umbria. I'm actually the only American guide authorized to share the wonders of Umbria. I passed those atrocious exams in 1997. The year I tried, 500 tried, 18 of us made it. So I am generally out at this time of year sharing the wonders live on the streets of Umbria, which I can't do now. And hence the reason for these presentations on Zoom ever since we've been in COVID lockdown, and I've been continuing. Delighted to share Umbria with you and doing it this way until I can share it with you live. I live in the country outside of Assisi with my husband Pino from Palermo, Sicily, and we have 3 children. And I, for years, had an English language school and then became a guide. And for years, we also worked the land. And some of you may have seen my other presentations. By the way, they're all on the virtual experiences page. So if you missed the one about life on the land, you may enjoy seeing the past Zoom. Rural Life Revisited. You'll even see photos of us with our neighbor's oxen in about 1976. But we're moving from the rural life today to the wonders of one of the hill towns of Umbria in this talk called Discovering the World's Most Livable Town, Todi. It's perched on a double-crested hill overlooking the Tiber River Valley. And you can see here the splendid views from Todi, views from all around the town. And please note also in this photo, 2 of the churches we'll be talking about tonight. Santa Maria della Consolazione, Renaissance splendor on the left at the bottom of the hill. Peaking at the top of the hill with the spire is San Fortunato, medieval church of the 13th century, housing the body or the relics of the patron saint of Todi, San Fortunato. Its livable appellation was attached to the town by Italian journalists following the study in 1990, an analytical study by University of Kentucky professor Richard Levine. He is an environmental architect, and he did a study on sustainability, and at that time deemed Todi the most livable city in the world. Boy, Italian journalists picked that up. Most of the Tuderte, the inhabitants of Todi, would absolutely agree with that description of their town as one of the most, they consider it the most livable city in the world. Here you can see it perched on a hill. The inhabitants are called Tuderti because this word derives from the Roman name of the town, Tuder. There were people on this hill as early as at least 6000 BC, members of agricultural and pastoral Italic tribes. The area becomes Roman, all of Umbria really becomes Roman in about the 3rd century BC, and by the 1st century BC, Todi is an important Roman municipium. Here you can see some of the splendid views of Umbria from this splendid hill town called Todi, Tuder for the Romans. The fulcrum of the town is Piazza del Popolo, and it was the center of Roman Tuder, perhaps the site of the Forum. And today it is also the site where the most important festivities take place. We'll be talking about that in just a second, but I'd like to mention these buildings. These buildings surround the Piazza del Popolo. This is considered one of the most beautiful medieval hill towns in Umbria, where we have a lovely combination and harmony of civic buildings with spiritual buildings, because as I'm taking this photo, behind me is the Duomo, the cathedral. So civic and spiritual authority unite around this piazza. As we look to the left, we see 2 13th century buildings, the one with Ghibelline crenellation, that is swallowtail battlements. is called the Palace of the People, Palazzo del Popolo. Next to it is Palazzo del Capitano del Popolo. He would have been the keeper of order, the equivalent of the medieval sheriff. This building is 14th century, and it is called the Palazzo dei Priori, the prior's palace, where city government met. The crenellation up here is Guelph. You may remember from a past lecture, Ghibelline indicates affinity for feudal authority, the Holy Roman Emperor. Ghibelline is a long word like emperor, hence the way to remember it, I always say when I'm doing a tour. Those who supported the papacy in the Middle Ages and papal authority were Guelphs, and Guelph is a short word like Pope. Guelph, Ghibelline battlements on the medieval buildings. So this was the center and the stage of the extraordinary Disfida festival that Pino and I recently attended near the end of October. And you're seeing in this photo the arrival in the main square of the banner wavers, and I believe these are the banner wavers, probably not of Todi, from one of the cities that participated in this festival. In this festival, about 600 people participated from cities all over Italy, including cities of 5 different regions of Italy. Most of the regions near Umbria, that is Latium, Tuscany, the Marches region, Abruzzo, but also there were participants from Sicily, because the sister city of Todi is Enna in Sicily. So here they are flinging their banners into the air in celebration of San Fortunato. After we attended this festival day, I was reading about the Disfida. I tried to find out on the internet who was the organizer. I did make contact with the president of the Association of Todi Archers, the organization called Arcus Tuder, who is Carlo Rellini. And I met with Carlo Rellini and Elisa Picchiotti, who's a guide in Todi, and thank you both for all your help on this talk and all the information you shared with me on Todi. We met after the festival, a couple days after the festival, to talk about what I'd seen, what had gone on. And I learned that the festival started for the first time in 2010. It was the idea of Carlo Rellini, the year he became president of Arcus Tuder, which is the Association of the Archers of Todi. And I said to him, I asked him, I said, how did you ever become an archer? Why did you take up archery? And he told me that he started archery, I think he was almost 30 years old. And he said, why? He laughed and he said, probably because I'm a Sagittarius. And in 2010, Carlo told me, he said, I was just wondering, I was thinking to myself, why have we never celebrated San Fortunato, our patron saint? Why had we never appropriately celebrated him? And he said these words to me, and I'd like to read them to you because these are his exact words. I was perplexed, Anna. Why had we not? In the past, on his October 14th feast day, we just set up a small stand with toys for the children below the steps leading to the church of San Fortunato. He added with a grin, I remember that stand because I lived until I was 26 years old right at the base of the bell tower of San Fortunato. So he will start this Disfida festival, which means La Disfida di San Fortunato means the challenge of San Fortunato. And it starts as an archery contest, although now the festa is far more complex than that. We're just going to go back and see the badge that is proudly worn by the archers who are members of the association Arcus Tuder. This says here, Todi, la città degli arcieri, Todi, the city of archers, Disfida, San Fortunato, the challenge of San Fortunato. And here you can see this year it was from the 9th to the 17th of October. And we were only there for events on the 17th of October, which was already extraordinary. But since the 9th of October, there had been archery contests, falconry contests, medieval banquets, medieval dance presentations, medieval music concerts, markets, medieval markets, a whole array of events which took place in Todi from this year, from October 9th to the 17th. When Pino and I arrived on the 17th, we passed outside the walls of Todi. We first came to one of the city gates of Todi, Porta Romana. This is not a medieval gate. This is 16th century. This gate was built under jurisdiction, under mandate by Pope Gregory XIII in the 16th century. And clearly a Renaissance structure. We call this kind of work in Italian bugnato, in English rusticated. This imitation of building with massive blocks as Greek and Roman temples were built, because remember that the Renaissance is a throwback to all that is Greek and Roman. Flanking the gate are flags of some of the two of the six rioni of Todi. The rioni are the districts of Todi, similar to our word region, really, but let's just call them the six neighborhoods of Todi. We soon passed another one of the gates, and this porta, or medieval arch, is mid-13th century. And you can see at the top of the hill, the tip of the bell tower of the church of San Fortunato. And then passing the 13th century medieval walls draped with the banners of the Rioni of Todi, we arrived at the splendid Renaissance church, Santa Maria della Consolazione. And mamma mia, what a sight, because standing in front of this Santa Maria della Consolazione Renaissance church was a medieval milites, a military individual. And he posed proudly for the photo. He was delighted to be photographed. I figured he had something to do with the festival. And soon along came a shuttle bus from the parking lot that took us to the center of town. And Signor Albano sat on the shuttle bus. And of course we chatted. And I learned he's a famous personage. This is Albano Torrasso, 83 years old. He is a maestro di armi. He is probably the expert, at least in Europe, on the creation of medieval weapons. Let's not exaggerate Europe, in Italy for sure. And he has done the medieval weapons for the films of famous Italian film directors, more than one, including Pupi Avati, who filmed Magnificat in Todi, I believe in 1993, and that's when Albano Torrasso fell in love with the town and decided to live here. He had been from northern Italy. He's created the medieval weapons in films of Martin Scorsese. So we had quite a chat riding this little bus up to town. And he showed me very proudly the sword he made, and inscribed on this sword, up here is the word Deo, and here is Gloria. Per la gloria di Deo. That's kind of bizarre to put on a sword for the glory of God, but it's all in size. This is his own sword, of which he is extremely proud. And he showed it to me with great, great pride as we rode the bus. We got off the bus in the same spot in front of the 18th century Teatro Comunale, and we soon saw arcieri, two archers with their bows and their arrows, and they had competed in the archery contest that morning. I think over 180 archers competed in the archery contest in the morning, which we had not seen because we were there after lunch. In a side street, I talked to some of the women arcieri, and I asked them if I might photograph them, and they said, certamente, ma solo con lei. Yes, but only with you. So here's our photo, and they were absolutely delightful. They, too, had competed in the archery contest, and from different areas of Italy, because as mentioned, I believe, but if not, let me say now, there were over 600 people participating in La Disfida di San Fortunato from 5 different regions of Italy. I don't know where these women were from. And after I left the women, we went into the main square. We're back again at Piazza del Popolo, and there was an archer there, very happy to be photographed. All the archers were. And at the opposite end of the square, this little archer was going up to the steps of his Duomo with his proud no. And before they headed off, he turned around and he was very happy to be photographed. Behind this little fellow is the Duomo of Todi, medieval splendor of the 13th century. And there had been a contest of falconry in the morning with people, especially the group from Siena, who are called the Falconieri del Re, the falconers of the king. And they were there participating that morning in a contest with raptors. And we met in the main square, a lovely woman. Her name is Alessandra. She has a wig on. She was dressed as Morgana the witch with her sculp's owl. And near her was her partner, who was dressed as a magician, if you will. And he did not have his bird there, but he was later on in the afternoon going into the main square with his barn owl. And Signor Albano was there, and he was very, very happy to be photographed. When I asked him why he had started creating medieval weapons, he told me this. He said, and here's a direct quote too, "It all started when my father sent me as a boy to apprentice to a farrier, the guy who makes horseshoes, and telling me, watch and follow the rules. Rules must be learned in life." And that's how he started out, becoming an artisan of medieval weapons. On Piazza del Popolo, to one side, under the stairs leading up to one of the noble civic palaces, was the stand where artisanally made bows and arrows were sold. There were archers near there talking about the morning events, very animated discussions. The market was going on here under these huge vaults, which the locals called I Voltoni. And this Palazzo del Capitano del Popolo rests on massive vaults. And under the vaults, as you can see here, stands were set up, and local culinary specialties of Umbria were being sold. Outside the Voltoni, were many of the archers talking about the morning events. And all the merchants selling their foods, cheeses, salamis, prosciutto, etc., were in medieval dress. There were different stands. Many people just wandered in there, and you could taste foods and so forth and had little nibbles before their lunch under the Voltoni, the huge vaults. And this is a shot taken from going up the stairs to the palace above. And you can see the vaulted atrium where the Mercato went on, Mercato Medievale. There would be a corteo in the afternoon, a procession of all in medieval dress. And Elisa told me, Picchiotti, the guide, she said, actually not all were in medieval dress. Some came in Renaissance dress. The city of Todi owns many costumes which were lent to the people. People coming from other parts of Italy and participating, many owned their own costumes, some had rented them. The awarding of the prizes to the archers took place just before the procession, and these are some of the winners here. This woman was one of the winners, this gentleman here. And these are other winners. He's here with his the banner of his town. These people, I believe, from Latium. This gentleman here was one of the winners. And there was a great spirit of camaraderie and mutual appreciation of each other's skills. You know, all during the day you felt the grand sense of this, attribute, which I can just say is Italian, of grande passione. Passione. Passion, the archers for archery, the falconers for falconry. The medieval dancers for medieval dance, the passion of everybody for the disfida, and the passion for their own town, because every person there was representing not just themselves, but their paese. These are some of the people near the town banners, some of the archers. The town banners were carried before the archers, before the falconers in the procession. And these are other people around the town banners from other parts of Italy. I believe these people were from Lazio. This is a gentleman, he's carrying the banner from his town, Civita Castellana, which is also in Lazio. And he's carrying the banner of the Compagnia Arciere delle Quattro Porte. That is the company of the archers of the four city gates. These people were from Urbino. Marvelous, of course, Renaissance hill town in the Marches region. That little girl was very happy to be photographed with me near their banner. And not only the passion of the adults was felt that day, but the passion of the children. Passione starts at a young age in this country. Here's the little girl from Urbino, and I believe some of these children are from Todi. They were all gathered together. And these children, I believe, are from Todi, Tuderti, participating in the Corteo in the afternoon. And they were so adorable, the children, and often the young girls were very secure and proud and everything, and the young boys at times a little bit shy about, being presented in these medieval and Renaissance costumes and so forth. Look at these with the little leggings and so forth. But it was really delightful seeing the children as well as the elderly, which we'll see also the elegance of the elderly. Participating in the corteo or the procession in the afternoon, which is kind of near the end of the festival, the Grande Corteo, were drummers. Drummers from the different cities, and many of the drum corps groups, there were women participating with great concentration. They're beating out the rhythms to these drums, and everybody is getting extremely animated and emotional at the sound of this drumming. And these women extremely intense as they were listening to the drum beat of their whole drum corps. And then leading the corteo in the afternoon would have been, of course, the host city, Todi. And here is the Palazzo dei Priori with the banners of the Rioni of Todi. And on their banner is the eagle, symbol of Todi. And that eagle here, which symbolizes Todi, is an eagle in bronze. It was put on the Palazzo dei Priori in the late 14th century. The eagle has been symbol of Todi at least from the 13th century, and it's said that it relates to an ancient legend, that the Umbri people, that is 6 BC, while enjoying a lunch along the Tiber River, their tablecloth, can you imagine this? The Umbri people in the 6th BC spreading out a tablecloth. They spread out a tablecloth, and an eagle swooped down, picked it up in its claws, took it to the top of the hill, dropped it there, and they decided this is where Todi must be born. So this is the legend of the eagle associated with Todi. These people are from Todi in the Corteo, this proud father with his children, another very proud couple, their flags typically red and black, another couple and their lovely little daughter. This outfit seems more Renaissance. His is more medieval. Again, a combination of different periods of history. The costumes dated from the 13th to, I'd say, the 16th century. And he's about to lead in the Compagnia Medievale of Todi, and that is the medieval dance group of Todi. These are some of the young banner wavers, the children, who fling the banners into the air and do all the banner acrobatics that even the adults can do. And these are the young girls in the Compagnia Medievale di Todi, the dance group. Don't they look like participants in a beauty contest? Aren't they just adorable? And they're a medieval dance group of Todi. These are the guards of probably, the city hall of the Middle Ages. There's the Bishop of Todi and nobility. And what I noticed on the face of everyone was how solemn they were and how they walked with stately, proud passion, everybody. These three couples are all from Todi. And I think some of these photos will show you the proud, noble dignity highlighting that October day in Todi. And it's best described through just these images of these people participating in the corteo from all over Italy. And the elderly people, too, with such great pride and composure. I think you get a sense just from seeing the images. How proud they are, how stately. You know, it's not easy, Carlo Relini told me when he started this festival in 2010, to convince people to go around in these clothes, to rent them, to pretend that they were this and that. And he said it wasn't easy. And he said now people are participating with passione. But in the beginning, it was a little bit of nudging to get people to participate. These women both had beautiful peacock feathers. She was holding a book. This elderly couple, very, very stately. They're not from Todi. I don't think they're from Todi, if I remember correctly. And then there were the trumpeters from the different towns in their elegant dresses, proudly carrying their trumpets as they head into the main square. There were military, milites it would be called, the military guards and so forth from various towns. And we even had there that day Cardinale Giulio Feltrio della Rovere, famous 16th century Cardinal of Urbino. He was of the Gonzaga family, son of nobility. And this young man, I said, "Are you Federico of Montefeltro?" And he said, "Yes, I am. This is the Duke of Urbino, Federico III of Montefeltro, 15th century." The great sponsor also of, the art and stuff which came out of Urbino, Raphael. His portrait was painted. Some of you may be familiar. It's in the Uffizi, the portrait of the Duke of Montefeltro with his wife by Piero della Francesca, a very, very famous couple in the Renaissance history of Italy. And the Cardinal and the Duke were glad to pose in a little photo for me. And the corteo ended in front of the Church of San Fortunato, appropriately. And here we're near the Church of San Fortunato, the Bishop of Todi, with some of the noble women. And here you can see the children all gathered, in many of the participants of the corteo, almost everybody here, on the steps of San Fortunato. And I really just have to say, thanks to all, to Carlo, Elisa, and to all the Tuderti who put their hearts in grande passione into the celebration of San Fortunato. And as I wrote on my blog, I think you truly gave to us the spirit of Todi. Quite an amazing event. Now, we started our visit to Todi in front of the Church of Santa Maria della Consolazione, magnificent Renaissance church. It's bordering Todi. It's on a hillside, built between 1508 and 1607. And it is a veritable temple. It has been called perhaps the most limpid of all classical architecture that has been built in Italy. According to legend, in the early 16th century, when a pair of local stonemasons were demolishing a decrepit wall, they uncovered an edicola, which is a small shrine, and it was overgrown with brambles. And the shrine housed a sacred image, an image of the Virgin and Child with St. Catherine of Alexandria. And the image was called later Le Mistiche Nozze di Gesù con Santa Caterina, the mystical marriage of Christ with Catherine of Alexandria, because the baby Jesus, which you'll see in the image, is holding out a wedding ring to her. And one of the stonemasons, they say it was perhaps Iole di Cecco, cleaned the image, the sacred image, with his fazzoletto, or his handkerchief, and he dusted off the image. And then he also rubbed his forehead and maybe rubbed his eye. And he'd been blind in one eye. When he rubbed his eye with that fazzoletto, he was miraculously healed. His eyesight returned. Word got out in 1508. The word spread rapidly. And by June of 1508, the local bishop mandated the building of a chapel to house the sacred image. And he wished the sacred image to be called Santa Maria della Consolazione, Holy Mary of the Consolation, with the hopes that the site would then become the destination of pilgrimages, especially those who were ill, seeking consolation, seeking healing. There had already been a church on the site here, but the city of Todi decided on the building of a grandiose Renaissance church in order to affirm the city's prestige and power, because surrounding Todi were medieval cities like Orvieto, not far from Perugia, with medieval cathedrals. But Todi was going to do something else. They were going to build a massive, huge, modern structure that is Renaissance. The position of the church just outside the walls, so that you see it as you arrive in Todi, was already a sign of the city's prestige and power to the surrounding cities. There it is outside the wall. The first sight you see, for example, when coming here from Orvieto. So already its position was a sign of power and prestige. Here's Todi, here's the Church of San Fortunato, which had been built earlier. Documents dated to, 12th, 13th century. And there's Santa Maria della Consolazione, kind of this massive sentinel, if you will. Many art historians attribute the design to Bramante. This church has been called, by Lorena Battistoni, who wrote a book on this church, a reminder of the harmony and unity of the universe, the unity of humanity with the divine. And as mentioned, recent studies have changed the attribution to Bramante. It was thought for years that the first designs perhaps were done by Bramante from Urbino, architect. But recent studies do not exclude a possible influence of Da Vinci on the structural design. I have not read the book of Luca Garai, all the book. I've read about it. It's on the top of my list as a book to read. He wrote a book on Da Vinci. He's an art historian and a Leonardo da Vinci specialist. He wrote also about Da Vinci and the Santa Maria della Consolazione of Todi. And he wrote this. He said, the design is part of the studies of churches of Leonardo and precedes the church's construction by 15 years. When Leonardo was in Milan and friend of Bramante, sharing commissions with him. Look at these designs. Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo's architectural activity is not limited to this, but the Consolazione is the only architectural example still existing. So Luca Garai, art historian and Leonardo da Vinci expert, does not exclude Bramante, but also does not exclude the influence on Bramante of Da Vinci. They were in close contact together in Milan. This is a church with 3 polygonal apses and a semicircular apse. These are some of the drawings of the church. And the church was started in 1508. It was finished in 1607, but many architects worked on this church. Architects known in Umbria, Cola da Caprarola, who had worked on architectural projects in Foligno, and Antonio da Sangallo il Giovane, who worked on architectural projects in Spoleto and Gubbio, Ippolito Scalza, famous Orvieto architect, Il Vignola, who worked on architectural structures in Perugia, Assisi, in Castiglione del Lago, in Città della Pieve, Galeazzo Alessi, who worked on architectural projects in Perugia and also Assisi and St. Mary of the Angels. So all of these individuals also contributed to the structure because work went on from 1508 to 1607. This is the door that we entered. There's 4 different entrances. And this is a splendid Renaissance door. And flanking the door are the eagles, symbol of Todi. And at 4 points on the Santa Maria della Consolazione, the eagle reigns in glory. And when you go in, it is absolutely splendid. You get the true sense of the inspiration of, if you will, the harmony between the human and divine, an extraordinary sense of space as you enter this structure. And as you enter the door into Santa Maria della Consolazione, you want to look to your right. We'll see it more closely in another picture. This is the altar, which contains the sacred image of the Virgin and Child and the mystical wedding of Catherine of Alexandria, the reason for which this magnificent church, Santa Maria della Consolazione, was built. The harmony and unity of the universe, very evident in the extraordinary structure. You're looking here at the ceiling. And as you go in, you want to look to your left, and there is a huge statue in wood, sculpted in the 17th century, of Pope Martin, 7th century Pope, and he was from Todi. And this is has metal on it because his foot is touched by all who come in. And he's holding, of course, the keys of Peter, indicating that, he was the Pope. The altar holding the sacred image was designed by Carlo Rinaldi, and it is mid-17th century, clearly full-blown Baroque. Here's the altar, and inside this altar is the sacred image, which the stonemasons found inside this decrepit wall that they were taking down. They found this little image in a little shrine, this edicola. This is the Virgin holding the Christ child, and he is putting a ring on the hand of Catherine of Alexandria. This is the mystical wedding of the Christ child with Catherine of Alexandria. It's not known who did the painting. Experts feel it was probably commissioned by a local Tuderte, someone from Todi, in the mid-14th century. Now, this is the dome right above the center, and in the 4 corners are the 4 evangelists. As you know from my past lectures, they often figure over an altar, over a door of the church. Let's remember that. They were depicted over the altar of the Basilica of San Francesco. If you remember, St. Matthew came down in the terrible earthquake of 97. They've been they're depicted over the door of San Rufino, the Basilica of St. Francis, many churches we've talked about in different lectures. And they're here in the Santa Maria della Consolazione Church. Now we're going to zero in on them here. Here we have 2 of the evangelists, and this is St. John's eagle, and light was coming right in through one of the 46 windows which illuminate this beautiful church here. This is St. Luke, and his symbol, John's is the eagle. They say his was the most intellectual, hence the flight of the eagle. Luke's that most grounded in popular culture. His is the gospel with the full nativity story, no room at the inn, shepherds watching their flock, and so forth. He's resting his book on the horns of the oxen as he writes. And here we have Mark's lion. He writes, and right next to him, sort of resting placidly, is an enormous lion. Mark, as you may remember, is the patron saint of Venice. And they think that, art historians believe anyway, first of all, the 4 were not done probably by the same artist. the greatest evidence is, according to one art historian, he sees much that is contemporary in the depiction of St. Matthew. Matthew's symbol is the angel. He is writing, and he's writing on a kind of lectern. And he turns because an angel is tapping him on the shoulder as if to inspire him. And wonderful three-dimensional perspective as he turns and listens to the voice of the inspiring angel. So these are the four evangelists on the cupola of Santa Maria della Consolazione. This picture I was able to take right in front of the sacred image in the Rinaldi altar. I was given permission by a young woman, the only one in the church besides me, Letizia. She's over here arranging flowers. I should mention that in the niches all around the Santa Maria della Consolazione are 18th century statues of the 12 apostles. This is the St. Martin statue. And she allowed me to go up to stand on the altar, the presbytery area, to take this photo. And we talked for some time. And she was arranging flowers. And I said, "May I take your photo?" And she said to me, "You can take my photo, but the beauty in here is certainly not mine." She said those words with such pride that it was clear to me that she would fully agree with the words of Dr. Bruno Severi, who's president of ETAB. ETAB stands for Ente Tuderte di Assistenza e Beneficenza, Todi Association for Assistance and Works of Charity. It's the cultural ancestor of an early 16th century pious work, Opera Pia project, which was founded to assist the needy and sponsor the building of this church. Now the church is taken care of by this organization, ETAB. And Dr. Severi, president, said this. These are his words. "Our Consolazione has accompanied generations and generations of Tuderti in many moments of our lives, entering into our very DNA, and such is the reason for our attachment to this masterpiece of the Italian Renaissance." And it certainly is, isn't it? And, you know, Carlo Relini, I don't know if I should call him Dottore, who sponsored the Disfida and said we have to celebrate San Fortunato. He told me later, he said, you know, our celebration has always been September 8th. I think that's the Feast of the Blessed Virgin's birthday, because Todi has always celebrated with great fervor La Consolazione, the Santa Maria della Consolazione church, which we just saw. And with this Disfida, there has been a tremendous celebration of the church of San Fortunato, built between the 12th century and the 15th century, and as you can see, unfinished in the upper level, which houses the body of San Fortunato. And this church is at the top of the town of Todi. The foundation stone of the church was laid in the late 13th century, and it was probably on a pre-existing church which had been built here. A legend narrates that it was built on the building site of the burial of a revered local saint. The 4th century bishop, San Cassiano, was buried here. And later, the 6th century bishop, San Fortunato, who had saved the city from the Goths and will become the town's patron saint, was buried here. There was an earlier edifice here, and it's evident also from the holy water fonts in the church. These two holy water fonts date from probably the 8th century AD or a bit later, but a pre-existing church. as does the leone stilibato at the front of the church. This could be of the 8th century. A leone stilibato was a lion that was meant to hold up a column, might have held up a column of a pre-existing church, even the 8th century. And here we see San Fortunato in this image, and he's holding his beloved city of Todi. When you enter, it's a splendid church, this one too. And this is probably the largest church in Umbria after the Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi. It's a magnificent Hallenkirchen, a hall church, ideal for preaching. This will become a Franciscan church with naves of equal height. The Benedictines were here as early probably as the 11th century, but the church will become Franciscan later on, and I believe it becomes Franciscan at the end of the 13th century, early 14th century. You can see from this photo that the facade was unfinished. The Benedictines were here first because they were the most powerful religious order of the High Middle Ages, and certainly were established here for sure by the end of the 12th century. And the Frati Minori will come here at the request of the bishop Pietro Caetani, who was a nephew of a pope, Boniface VIII. And astoundingly, when the Franciscans came here in the 13th century, they did not name the edifice after their founding father, Francesco. But after the patron saint of the town, they renounced the privilege of naming it after Francesco and continued to call it the site of the church, the place of San Fortunato, and that name remains. Until at least the 14th century, the Franciscans lived in perfect symbiosis with the local Tudeti and were protagonists of the town's religious life as well as political life and civic life. In 1292, the church is transformed into the Gothic edifice in that Hallenkirchen, which we just saw. And each of the 3 naves in the Hallenkirchen opens to a magnificent sculpted portal, and you can see the portals here. Giovanni Santucci, with his nephew Bartolo, worked on the doors in the mid-15th century. I think he worked a couple decades, and then alas, he died, and this is the reason that the church is never finished. It is the central portal is a magnificent splendor. A young couple was there the day that I visited. This is another visit to Todi after the festival, and I think we were the only people in the church. It was actually very moving. And we were both fascinated by the facade. The facade, again, the upper part not completed, but the splendor really is not to miss in the central portal. This is Santucci's sculptural work. On the left is the angel Gabriel. On the right is the Virgin, scenes of the Annunciation. The angel on the left, it is thought by art historians, is by a famous Sienese sculptor of the 15th century, Jacopo della Quercia. If you look at the Virgin, you can see that she is done by a much less skilled artisan. So the same artisan did not do both of the statues. But I just spent an extensive amount of time studying the sculptures in framing the doorway. Intertwining were grapes and figs. By some art historians, they represent goodness and evil. There were many curious nude figures, parts of their bodies missing, arms and legs, sometimes some looking up, some looking down, in every imaginable position. You can see this one here is holding a club. This is the head of an individual here. And in between these saints were niches holding images of saints in their little edicole little shrines. This is San Fortunato. This is the angel Gabriel. Over here is the Blessed Virgin Mary. Here you can see the grapes, the twisted columns. It is a doorway, really. I think I was in front of it a good half hour. There were images of one above the other, up the wall, prophets with their scrolls. There was an image of Abraham with Isaac, David with his lyre, Moses with his staff drawing water from the desert. So Old Testament figures, New Testament figures, saints, prophets, kind of grotesque, bizarre figures which no one's really been able to interpret, all come together to create the splendor of the door. There is San Fortunato, there is Francis of Assisi receiving the stigmata while praying on Mount Laverna in Tuscany a couple years before his death in 1224. There's Brother Leo, who was with him at the time of the stigmata, asleep under a tree. Up here seems to be the Dove of Peace. Absolutely extraordinary, intricate sculptures of the mid-15th century. Francis, of course, will appear inside his church. Most of the frescoes, however, are gone. There are remnants. This is one chapel where images of the life of Francis were all painted. The painter was influenced by Giotto, no doubt about it. He's painting here in the mid-14th century. This is an image greatly ruined of Francis receiving the stigmata while praying on Mount Laverna in Tuscany. This is an image of Francis's death in his Porziuncola chapel below Assisi. This is the image of the prophetic dream of Innocent III when Francis holds up the church. All these copying the frescoes of Giotto in the Basilica of St. Francis, done about 40 years after Giotto frescoed, or Giotto's school frescoed in the upper church. That would be 1299 to 1300. These are about 1340. There's an image of another great Franciscan saint, Bernard of Siena, two images together. And he's holding up the IHS plaque, which he always held up when preaching, Jesus Christ, Savior of mankind. He will live 200 years after the founding father of his order. He lives in the mid-15th century. He preached in Assisi in 1425. And these frescoes were probably done in the 15th century. They're in one of the side chapels. In the Church of San Fortunato, there are 13 side chapels along the nave. 7 on one side, 6 on the other. Here's a Franciscan saint. Art historians do not agree on who this saint could be. Many think it could be Francis. Although perplexed because he's holding the book, but his hands don't show he had the stigmata. We're not sure. This is a martyr saint near him because the palm is the symbol of the martyr. Another Franciscan image is painted under the crucifixion. This is one of the side chapels. There's a deceased person here. It's thought by many art historians that this could be Matteo di Acquasparta. He was a 13th century Franciscan cardinal and brilliant theologian with strong associations with the Church of San Fortunato. Of course, starring in the Church of San Fortunato will be San Fortunato himself in an image over the altar, which we'll see. And the altar is surrounded by a magnificent choir stall sculpted in wood by Antonio Maffei of Gubbio in 1590. 58 sculpted seats. And the major seat was the bishop's throne here. The crypt was built in 1580, shortly after they found a sepulcher or a sarcophagus containing the remains of the 5 protector saints, Santi Protettori they're called, of Todi. So the crypt was built at order of Cardinal Angelo Chesi to house the relics of the 5 protector saints of Todi, and we will be visiting the crypt. But first we want to note this statue of San Faustino. Excuse me, it shouldn't be Faustino. It should be San Fortunato. And this is mid-17th century. This is an ex voto. That is thanks for a favor received. At that time, he helped Todi win a battle against the city of Castro in nearby Latium. So this is a thanks for his intervention. And this is the altar depicting the 5 saints buried below. 3 are bishops: San Callisto, San Cassiano. San Cassiano is a 4th century bishop. Callisto is a 3rd century bishop. And San Fortunato, who was bishop when the Goths invaded from the north of Italy in the 6th century. Remember, the fall of the Roman Empire was the 5th century AD. And then the country is open to invasions by the bearded ones, the barbarians, among them the Goths, coming from the area perhaps of present-day Germany. And it's said that 2 young noblewomen were taken hostage by Totila, leader of the Goths. And San Fortunato had a meeting with Totila and was able to procure the release of these young hostages. Not much is known about his life. Much is known about his miracles. They were recorded by Gregory the Great in the 6th century AD. The images of the saints are late. They're maybe 19th century, but the columns are absolutely beautiful, and they date from the pre-existing altar. The columns are maybe 13th century, maybe earlier. You can see the beauty of the columns right here. And these are some of the saints. See, even 11th century. Some say 13th, some say 11th, 12th, but pre-existing church. And the saints painted in the 19th century. This is Degna. Degna and Romana were Roman martyr saints. In the crypt is the sarcophagus of the late 16th century, holding the relics of the 3 early Christian bishops, San Cassiano, Callisto, Fortunato, and the young women martyred by the Romans, Degna and Romana, in the 4th century AD. And behind this sarcophagus is the memorial and the tomb to Jacopone da Todi. Jacopone da Todi lived from 1260 to 1306. And I have to read you something written about him. It houses his body, this tomb, and he is a Franciscan. Composed many lauds, poems, also in Italian Vulgate, and composed over 100 religious poems. He was married. He suffered tremendously from the death of his wife, never really recovered from that. He will become a Franciscan, and it is said that his poems are of great force, power, originality. And he's considered a protagonist of the medieval poetry with, quote, una voce vigorosa e sconvolgente, a vigorous and shocking voice. It is thought that Jacopone also composed the Stabat Mater Dolorosa. He lived in the monastery of San Fortunato for a bit of time, and he died in the 13th century. He actually lived in San Fortunato imprisoned after his excommunication. He was excommunicated by one of the popes for having disagreed with some of the papal teaching. He believed in a very, if you will, severe spirituality. Now, the inscription of his tombstone in Latin really intrigues. And this is the text of his tombstone. This is the best translation I could find of the Latin. Here lie the bones of blessed Jacopone de Benedetti da Todi, friar minor, having gone mad with the love of Christ. By a new artifice, he deceived the world and took heaven by violence. Jacopone da Todi. Coming out of the crypt, and this is your exit from the crypt, you come to a small chapel, which is called the Chapel of the Holy Sacrament. It's topped by a beautiful pulpit, This is San Fortunato sculpted on a slab. The slab could be as early as the 11th century. And it's thought that this chapel at the top of the steps to the right of the altar is the site of the earliest church of San Fortunato, which would have been 8th century. And at that time, the church would have not been called San Fortunato. It's dedicated to San Fortunato at the end of the 13th century. Below San Fortunato is, of course, the eagle of Todi. There's the regal eagle of Todi, reigning in the Church of San Fortunato, symbol of the strength and the force of Todi, and inspiring to see in this extraordinary town. It was just inspiring for me to see it right under the statue of their patron saint. In other words, this combination of their devotion to the patron saint and the love of their town united together in this pulpit in the Church of San Fortunato. Thank you for joining me in Todi, and let us hope we can see it together live as soon as possible.